I grew up an hour away from Bucknell and Harrisburg, so this was my first time living in a place that wasn't central Pennsylvania. Um, I was required to move to New York as part of the first year with SeatGeek, and then after that, I could live wherever I wanted. I really like New York now, but the process of me like sort of finding an apartment, Bucknell's resources on that were quite poor, I found, where the only real sort of connection they had was with a weird real estate company that was offering apartments for way too expensive. I spent a month living in San Francisco for an internship I had the prior summer, and I did something called co-living, like a format of living called co-living, where basically you don't really know your roommates, but you are sharing common spaces with them. And I found a similar place in New York and lived there for a year. I just Googled pretty ruthlessly and was looking at a few different like co-living companies. I had to do everything on my own. Luckily I didn't have to move far. And luckily my parents were willing to drive me. But no, I did most of that myself.
I knew I was getting married like relatively soon after graduation when I was looking at housing. So I was looking at apartments at first, but they all like require 1 year leases. And I was like, I'm not paying for a place for a year if I'm gonna move in like 4 months. Um, so I just ended up staying with my parents, which I think is a totally viable option for people who are just starting out. Like if you have family or friends who live nearby where you're going to work, like working out an agreement with them to stay with them for a little before you like fully settle into your own place is like a totally viable option.
I would say this is one of those places where I'm very fortunate. So when I was deciding between different offers, one of my close friends at that time already accepted a job in the Seattle, Washington area, which is where I'm located now. And so that was also a little bit influencing my decision of, oh, if I were to move there, I like this company already more. And if I move there, we can live together. So that's how we were able to pool up resources and one of her professor at Bucknell knows someone in the area, and he just connected us all together. And that person was so helpful. We like to call her our host family, our adopted American mother. And she was actually touring some place locally for us and providing us resource when we first started. And I went home for the summer, but she stayed here. And so she had virtual tour with the apartment complex, and she thought it was nice, so she was able to handle that part for me. House sharing and just having someone in the same place to check in on you every now and then, it's not necessarily the worst thing.
I feel like that struggle is kind of a necessary thing to experience. Like I think I had it very fortunate where I had my parents as a resource. My sister was also like buying a condo at the time, so she like recently went through the process and knew or told me what to like look out for, things like to look for, and they did the whole apartment house search. So they were still kind of like riding that high when they came up and saw me, and they're like, "Let's look at houses." I would leave everything the way it is because I feel like I went through the struggles that I needed to get to where I am now. But I like graduated. I started looking for places, but it's just like housing market plus Boston is just not a good combo. I like lived in a family friend's attic for like 5 or 6 months. So I was able to like save up a little bit of money just doing that. But in February, I actually got my own place a little farther north. So I'm actually up in Haverhill, so I'm almost into New Hampshire. But I rather invest my money into a place that I can, grow that asset and sell whenever I decide to move, instead of paying rent. And my parents, I was fortunate enough to have my parents help me with a down payment, so that kind of, you know, I'm paying less than rent would be in Boston. So that like works out financially. The only thing is just like I'm pretty far from the city, so driving into work can be anywhere from like 1 to 2 hours.
One thing my company offered, they had a like housing stipend for people who are like 50 miles away from the workplace or something. And even if companies don't offer a stipend, you can ask them, and a lot of them will they have like partnerships with relocation companies that can help you find like apartments or housing near your workplace and just help with like the searching process. I think I was eligible for like $8,000, and it could cover like it could cover either the first couple months of rent. If you were moving and needed like a U-Haul or something, you could use part of that to cover that expense. Or if you're like somebody who's in the position to buy a home, you could use it for part of like the down payment or the mortgage or whatever.
One other thing was like asking for like relocation benefits is another big thing for companies. Like it's not something they advertise usually, even if they have them, but if you ask, like I think they were able to cover like 4 grand in terms of like moving costs and like the first like month of rent or whatever, or like deductibles that people have to pay.